I didn't call anyone. I just stood there in the doorway and counted the bottles. 3 empty water bottles lined up against the baseboard. All 3 caps screwed back on. All 3 bone dry. The kind of thing you do when you're too weak to throw them in the trash, but you still want things to look orderly. That told me everything I needed to know about how long she'd been like that. And it told me everything I needed to know about my wife. That even in that state, she was still trying to keep things tidy. My name is not important. What happened to my family is, I'm 63 years old. I worked 31 years in commercial property management. I'm the kind of man who fixes the loose hinge before it becomes a broken door. I'm methodical. I don't panic. I've been told more than once that I have the emotional range of a hardware store, which my wife always said with a smile because she knew it wasn't true. She knew me better than that. She knew I felt everything. I just felt it quietly. Her name is Miriam. We've been married 38 years. She has early-stage Parkinson's. Not severe, not yet, but enough that she can't drive anymore. Enough that the stairs are hard on certain days. Enough that we'd made arrangements. Careful, deliberate arrangements. I need you to understand that before I tell you the rest. I need you to understand that nothing about what happened was accidental. Nothing was an oversight. Every single thing that happened to my wife while I was away was a choice. Someone made a decision, every single day, and that decision was to let her sit in that room and suffer. I had been gone for 11 days. I managed a property portfolio in the Southwest for a group of investors. 3 commercial buildings in Tucson and 1 mixed-use development outside Albuquerque. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid well and it kept us comfortable. The trip was supposed to be 14 days. A routine inspection, some contractor meetings, a licensing issue with the Albuquerque property that needed my physical presence to resolve. Before I left, my wife and I sat down together with our son. I'll call him my son because that's what he was, legally and in every way that used to matter, and we went over everything. Her medication schedule. The physical therapist who came Tuesdays and Thursdays, the home health aide, a woman named Constance, who came every weekday morning for 3 hours. The neighbor across the street, Patricia, who had a key and who I'd asked to check in every other day. My son, I'll call him Derek, sat across from us at the kitchen table and nodded at everything I said. He was 34. He lived 40 minutes away. He had a good job in IT, a house that Miriam and I had helped him buy 6 years ago with a $60,000 gift for the down payment. He and his wife, I'll call her Renata, had been to dinner at our house 2 weeks before I left. Everything seemed fine. That's the thing about betrayal in a family. It doesn't announce itself. It looks like a Tuesday night dinner. It looks like nodding at a kitchen table. I called Miriam every evening from Tucson. The first 3 days, she sounded fine. A little tired, but she always got tired in the evenings. By day 4, she sounded quieter than usual. But when I asked if she was all right, she said yes, just a headache. By day 6, she didn't answer. I called twice more and left a voicemail. Derek texted me an hour later. She's resting, Dad. I was just there. She's fine. I believed him. That's the part I have to live with. On day 9, Patricia called me. I was in a parking garage in Albuquerque when my phone rang. Patricia is in her late 60s, a retired school administrator, the kind of woman who apologizes for calling too late, even when it's 2 in the afternoon. She apologized twice before she got to the point. I went over Tuesday like you asked, she said, and I went back yesterday because something didn't feel right. Victor, your door was locked from the inside. I knocked for 15 minutes. I could hear her. She was calling out, but not loud enough. I ended up going around back. You got in? I did. Victor, she was in bed. She hadn't. I don't think anyone had been there. I brought her water, and I sat with her for 2 hours, and I called her doctor. He came. He said she needed fluids. She paused. I'm not trying to start anything. I didn't know who else to call. I was in that parking garage for a long time after she hung up. I didn't scream. I walked to my rental car, sat down, and looked at my hands on the steering wheel. I thought about the locked door, I thought about the 3 dry water bottles lined up against the baseboard, caps screwed back on. I thought about my son texting me she's fine on day 6, which meant he had been there, which meant he saw her and drove home anyway. I booked a flight back for the next morning. I didn't tell Derek I was coming. I want to be honest about what I was thinking on that flight home, because I've told this story a few times now, and people always assume I came back ready to burn everything down. I wasn't. I was 62 years old. I'd been awake since 3 in the morning, and I was sitting in a middle seat on a regional jet thinking about the possibility that there was an explanation. That Constance had been sick and a replacement hadn't worked out. That Derek had misunderstood something. That Patricia, bless her heart, had panicked over something that looked worse than it was. I needed to see it with my own eyes before I decided anything. The cab dropped me off at 7:40 in the morning. I went in through the back. Old habit, I always parked in the back, and I went upstairs. She was in our bedroom. She was awake. She was sitting up against the headboard, and she looked at me when I came through the door, and she said, "You're home early." "I am," I said. "How are you feeling?" "Thirsty," she said. She'd lost weight. Her hands looked wrong, too thin, the tendons more visible than they should have been. There was no water glass on the nightstand. Nothing. I went to the bathroom and filled a cup and brought it to her, and she drank it slowly, carefully, the way you drink when your body has forgotten what it's like to have enough. I sat on the edge of the bed and I asked her to tell me what had happened. She talked for a long time. Constance, the home health aide, had stopped coming on day 3 of my trip. Miriam wasn't sure exactly why, only that Derek had told her there was a scheduling problem and someone else would come. Someone else never came. The physical therapist had been canceled too, apparently. Miriam didn't have her own phone nearby. She'd left it charging on the kitchen counter downstairs before I left, and in the first couple days she hadn't worried about it because she expected things to sort themselves out. Derek came once. She was sure of that. Day 6, he came, brought her a sandwich and a glass of juice, checked that the TV remote worked, and left. He was there for maybe 30 minutes. When she asked him to bring up her phone, he said he would, and then he didn't. Renata had come once, briefly, 3 days after that. She stood in the doorway of the bedroom and told Miriam she looked better than she'd expected. She did not bring water. She did not stay. "Did you ask them for help?" I asked. Miriam looked at me with an expression I recognized. The quiet, slightly exasperated look she'd been giving me for 38 years when she thought I was asking the wrong question. "Victor," she said. "I did. I asked Derek to call Constance back. I asked Renata to help me get downstairs. I asked both of them more than once. I held her hand and I looked at the wall and I thought, all right, now I know. Now I know exactly what I'm dealing with." I spent 3 days not saying a word to Derek. I want to be clear about this because people have asked me how I managed it, how I sat across from my son at his kitchen table, 3 days after coming home to my dehydrated wife, and had a perfectly normal conversation about a plumbing issue he was having, and a baseball game, and whether we wanted to come to his house for the 4th of July. I managed it because I am a man who spent 31 years managing commercial properties. I know how to assess damage before I called a contractor. I know that the worst thing you can do is confront a problem before you understand its full scope. And I needed to understand the full scope. So I called Constance. She told me she had received a call from Derek on day 3 of my trip. He told her there had been a family decision to reassess the care arrangements. He told her she was not needed for the next 2 weeks. He told her he would be in touch. She had assumed everything was fine because she had no reason to think otherwise. When I asked if my wife had called her, she said no. She hadn't heard from Miriam at all. That told me the phone had been kept away from her. Or, at minimum, no one had bothered to make sure she had it. I called the physical therapist and got the same story. Canceled by Derek. A temporary family decision. I sat with those phone calls for a day. Then I called my attorney. Here is something I should tell you about Derek and Renata, because it's relevant to understanding what came next. 6 months before my trip to Tucson, Miriam and I had a conversation with Derek about the house, this house, the one we'd lived in for 22 years, the one that would be part of our estate. Derek had made some comments, offhand at first, then more pointed, about whether we thought about downsizing, whether we considered moving into a community. He mentioned a couple of assisted living places in the area, sent me brochures. At the time, I took it at face value. Lots of people our age make that move. I told him we were fine where we were, and we'd revisit it in a few years. What I didn't know, till my attorney started pulling records, was that Derek and Renata had been in serious financial trouble for almost 2 years. Credit card debt, a failed investment in a restaurant that his brother-in-law had talked him into, a home equity loan that was coming due. The numbers weren't catastrophic, but they were significant, and more importantly, they'd been hidden from us entirely. I also didn't know, this came later, from a source I won't name because it involved other family members, that Derek had, at some point in the preceding year, had a conversation with a financial advisor about the value of our estate. He had not had that conversation with me. My attorney put it plainly. Your son was trying to accelerate his inheritance. Removing your wife's professional care was not negligence. It was a calculated reduction of her quality of life in hopes that things would resolve more quickly. I had to put the phone down when she said that. I had to walk to the window of her office and look at the parking lot for a moment. Then I picked up the phone and I said, "Tell me what we need." We needed documentation. I had cameras in the house. This is important, and it matters that I explain why they were there. Miriam's condition had worsened slightly over the winter. We'd had one incident where she fell on the stairs, and it had taken her 40 minutes to get to a phone. After that, I installed cameras in the common areas of the house, not the bedroom, not the bathroom, the hallway, the living room, the kitchen, the front and back entrances. I'd told everyone about them. There was no secret. Derek knew they were there. What Derek did not know was that the footage stored automatically to a cloud server that I accessed from a separate login. He thought he'd been clever. He had, at some point during my absence, gone into the house using his spare key and checked the physical camera hub. I believe he thought that if anything ever came up, he could claim the cameras hadn't been working. But they had been working. I had 11 days of footage. I watched it over the course of a weekend, alone in my home office with the door closed and a yellow legal pad on the desk. I wrote down the timestamps. I wrote down what I saw. Day 1 and 2, Constance came, did her job, left. Everything normal. Day 3, Derek arrived at 8:15 in the morning. He and Constance spoke in the kitchen. At 8:52, Constance left with her bag and did not come back. At 9:07, Derek walked through each room of the downstairs, paused in the hallway, looked up at one of the cameras, and then walked out. Day 6, Derek arrived with a paper bag from a deli, went upstairs, came back down 27 minutes later, left. Day 9, afternoon, Renata arrived, went upstairs, came back down in 11 minutes, stood in the kitchen for 4 minutes eating something from a container she'd brought with her, left. Between day 3 and day 11, when I came home, no Constance, no physical therapist, no one except Derek once, and Renata once, and Patricia, who had been the one to actually help my wife. I made copies of all of it. I made multiple copies. I gave one to my attorney, one to my accountant, and one to a safety deposit box at a bank that Derek had no knowledge of. Then I called a detective agency. I want to talk about why I didn't just go to Derek and confront him. Because people ask me this, especially people my age. They say, you should have just called him, talked to him, given him a chance to explain. And here is my honest answer. I had spent 34 years giving Derek chances to explain. When he got into trouble in college and called us instead of the police, we explained that away. When he borrowed $8,000 and paid back $3,000 and never mentioned the rest, we explained that away too. When Renata made a comment at Thanksgiving 3 years ago about how she hoped we had everything organized in case anything happened to us, organized like we were a filing cabinet, I explained that away as well. I was done explaining things away. I needed him to face what he had done in a place where he could not explain it away, and for that, I needed to be ready. The detective agency confirmed the financial picture, the debts, the restaurant investment, the equity loan. They also found something else. Derek and Renata had toured 3 assisted living facilities in the prior 8 months. One of them, a high-end place 40 miles from here, had a record of an inquiry from Derek about pricing and availability for a resident with early neurological decline. The inquiry had been made 4 months before my trip to Tucson. 4 months before Constance was sent home. They had been planning this. I gave everything to my attorney. She brought in a colleague who specialized in elder abuse cases. We had a meeting that lasted 3 hours. At the end of it, my attorney set her pen down and looked at me and said, "You have one of the cleaner cases I've seen. When do you want to move?" "When it's airtight," I said. "It's airtight now." "Then we move." We did it on a Sunday. I had called Derek 2 days before and told him that Miriam wanted to see him, that she was feeling better and wanted to have a family lunch. He said he and Renata would come Sunday at noon. I cooked. Miriam sat at the kitchen table in a good sweater, hair done, her color back. She had improved significantly since coming under proper care again. I'd reinstated Constance immediately, added a second aide for the afternoons, brought the physical therapist back to 3 times a week. In the 5 weeks since I'd come home, Miriam had started looking like herself again. She was still unsteady on the stairs. She still had harder days, but she was there, and she was present, and she knew exactly what was going to happen at noon on Sunday. She'd made that choice herself. I want you to know that. This was not me deciding for her. I sat with her and told her everything I'd found and what I was prepared to do, and I asked her what she wanted. She thought about it for a long time. Then she said, "All of it. I want them to face all of it." Derek and Renata arrived at 12:05. They came in through the front, which they always did, and Derek kissed his mother on the cheek and said she looked great. Renata set a bottle of wine on the counter and commented on the weather. My attorney was in the living room. 2 detectives, not the private kind, the actual kind, were parked outside. Derek turned from the counter and saw my attorney, and his face did something I'd never seen it do before. It went very still. Not guilty still. More like calculating still. Like he was running through options. "What's this?" he said. "Sit down," I said. "Dad, sit down." He sat down. Renata sat next to him. She had not touched the wine. My attorney laid out the documentation. The camera footage timestamps. The call records showing Derek contacting Constance and the physical therapist, the financial records. The assisted living inquiry. The medical documentation from Miriam's doctor, who had filed a formal statement, and from the doctor Patricia had called, who had documented Miriam's condition on day 9. I sat across the table from my son, and I watched him read through it. He tried 4 different explanations over the next 40 minutes. I won't walk through all of them because they don't deserve the airtime. The last one was the one I remember most clearly. He looked at me and he said, "I was trying to help you, Dad. You were overwhelmed. We thought you needed..." "Stop," I said. He stopped. "Your mother," I said, "sat in that room for 8 days without reliable water, without her medication administered correctly, without her physical therapy, without a single person whose job it was to care for her. She called for help and she was not heard. You were there and you saw her and you drove home." I looked at him for a long moment. "Don't tell me what you were trying to do." The detectives came in 20 minutes later. Elder abuse in the state is a felony when the victim is a vulnerable adult and the perpetrator is in a position of trust. Derek was arrested that afternoon on 2 counts. Renata was arrested on 1 count as an accessory. The tour of the assisted living facility, made in her name and traced back through her email, had established her involvement clearly enough. There was a news van outside by the time they were walked to the car. I had not called the news. I don't know who did, but I didn't stop it either. I sold the house. Not because I had to financially, we were fine. I sold it because Miriam and I had talked about it the week after the arrest, sitting on the back porch in the evening, and she said the house felt different now. She said she could still see him standing in the kitchen doorway on day 6, holding his paper bag from the deli, and she didn't want that picture anymore. We moved to a smaller place. A single story, closer to her specialist, and closer to Patricia, who has remained one of the finest human beings I have ever known. Constance is still with us. The physical therapist comes 3 times a week. I work part-time now, consulting, nothing that takes me away for more than a day or two. Derek pled guilty to 1 felony count as part of a plea agreement. He received 18 months probation, mandatory community service, and a formal restraining order that covers both Miriam and me. The restraining order was our stipulation. Our attorney negotiated it. Derek's attorney tried to push back, and ours held firm. Renata's charges were reduced. She received probation as well. I am not going to tell you I've made peace with it. I'm 63 years old, and I've had to bury what my son is. That's a different kind of grief than losing someone. It's losing someone who is still alive and still walking around and still, occasionally, sends a letter that his attorney probably helped him write. I don't respond. I read them once, and then I put them in a folder that I keep in a drawer I don't open often. What I've made peace with is this. I came home in time. And Miriam is here, and she is sitting in the backyard right now, reading a novel in the afternoon light, and she waved at me through the window a few minutes ago, with the same hand that was too thin and too weak the morning I found her. I know exactly what I almost came home to, and I know what I did when I found out. I'll tell you the thing I think about the most, because it's not what people expect when I say that. It's not the arrest. It's not the paperwork or the attorneys or even the moment Derek's face went still at the kitchen table. It's Patricia. It's a woman in her late 60s, retired, who went back a second time because something didn't feel right, who went around to the back of the house, who sat with my wife for 2 hours and then called a doctor, who called me in a parking garage in Albuquerque and apologized twice before getting to the point. Nobody told her to do that. There was no system that produced Patricia. She just decided that going back one more time was the right thing to do. I think about that more than I think about my son. I think that is the version of a person I want to be. Careful, quiet, going back when something feels wrong. Not making noise about it, not needing recognition. Just going back. Miriam and I had Patricia over for dinner last month. I made her favorite, which she'd mentioned once years ago, and which I'd written down because that's the kind of man I am. Methodical, even about kindness. She laughed when she saw it on the table. You didn't have to do all this, she said. I know, I said. That's why I wanted to. Some things you hold on to. After 38 years, you learn what those things are. Miriam is reading in the backyard. The afternoon light is coming through the window. I don't need a locked door to tell me what I have. I know exactly what I have. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this happened, not in any grand philosophical way. I'm a practical man, always have been, but when you spend 31 years managing properties, you learn that nothing fails without a reason, and the reason is almost never the thing you first think it is. A roof doesn't collapse because of one bad storm. It collapses because of 10 small decisions that were never made, spread out over years, until the structure couldn't hold anymore. Derek didn't become who he became overnight. I raised him. That means some of what happened is a ledger I have to sit with. I don't say that to absolve him. What he chose to do to his mother is on him, fully and completely, and I will never soften that. But I think there's an honesty required in looking back and asking, where did I look away when I shouldn't have? Where did I explain something away that deserved to be examined? The $8,000 he never paid back. The comment Renata made at Thanksgiving that I let slide. The brochures for assisted living that I took at face value. None of those things caused what happened, but each of them was a moment where I chose comfort over clarity, and I think that's worth naming. What I know now, what I know in my bones, in a way I didn't before, is that integrity is not a thing you have or don't have. It's a thing you practice, or you don't, in small decisions every day when no one is watching and nothing is on the line. Derek made a series of small decisions that looked harmless from the outside. He told Constance there was a scheduling problem. He brought a deli sandwich on day 6. He texted me she's fine. Each one was just a small decision, and together they nearly killed his mother. Miriam made small decisions too. Even at her worst, she lined those empty water bottles up against the baseboard, caps screwed back on. She was trying to keep things orderly in the middle of something terrible. That is not a small thing. That is a woman with more dignity in her exhausted hands than most people carry in a lifetime. I watched her fight back over 5 weeks, slowly, with Constance's help and the physical therapist and proper medication and enough water, and I thought, that is what a person looks like who has spent decades building something real inside themselves. It doesn't disappear. Even when everything else is taken away, it's still there. Patricia is the one I keep coming back to, though, a retired woman who had no obligation to anyone involved, who went back a second time because something felt wrong, who sat with my wife for 2 hours on a Tuesday afternoon, and then called a doctor, and then called me in a parking garage. The cause of my wife's survival, if we're being honest about causes, was Patricia going around to the back of the house. Everything else I did came after that. Everything I was able to do was only possible because one person decided that going back one more time was the right thing. I think about the kind of person who does that, who they are, how they got that way. And I think they didn't get that way from anything dramatic. They got that way from 100 small choices to pay attention, to take things seriously, to not tell themselves it's probably fine when something feels wrong. That's all it is. Attention. Seriousness. The discipline to act on what you know instead of on what's convenient, that's the only inheritance worth leaving. Not the house. I sold that. Not the money. Not the portfolio. Not anything with a dollar sign. The way you move through the world when no one is looking. The way you treat people when there's nothing to gain from treating them well. The way you go back a second time. I'm 63. Miriam is reading in the backyard. I know exactly what I have, and I know exactly what it cost.